Okay, this is part 2 of the spiritual game plan, the theme of resilience, and we are back today to continue where we left off in part 1. So we're going to do a quick introduction. I'm Cheri Fletcher, and I've had the honor of working with these awesome students for the past 3 months, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Stella. This is my second year in spiritual game plan, and I am a senior.
Hi, I'm Bethel. Okay, pause. I got lost. Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Bethel. I'm a junior, and this is my first year in spiritual game plan.
Hello, I'm Ezekiel. I'm a senior, and this is my second year to be a mentor in the spiritual game plan.
Hey, I'm Harrison. I'm a junior, and this is my first year with the spiritual game plan.
Awesome. So in part 1, we were able to hear the testimony from Stella and Ezekiel on their personal walk with the digital Babylon that we're living in and resilience in their faith. And today we're going to be hearing from Bethel and Harrison on how resilience has played out in their life and in their walk in high school. So Bethel, we're going to start with you. And one of the things that you talked about when we were together was how you found yourself using your time and the different tools that Satan used to take up your time. So go ahead and share that with us.
Yeah, so I found myself so busy with school, and although I didn't have any sports, I was involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, and I signed up for so many of them to the point where my only free time for lunch was on Friday. So I had like my meetings from Monday to Thursday. And so I chose to do all of this. And my problem was prioritizing in ways that I thought was right. And I was listening to myself instead of seeking God in prayer and through his word. And the Bible, it talks about accountability. In Romans 14, verse 12, it says, "So then every one of us shall give account of himself to God." And we are accountable for how we choose to spend our time. And the reason why I didn't have any time was because I chose not to. I chose to put mainly school above God. I chose to put family and friends above God and all the things that was going on in my life and excuses. It was the littlest of things that I allowed to control me, and all of this occupied my time.
Yeah, that can happen to all of us where we're at. And I like that you were able to acknowledge that and see that. And you came up with an acronym when we were talking and planning this. And I really like that acronym. You talked a little bit about it in part 1, but just remind us what that acronym is.
Yeah, so it's busy, buried under Satan's yoke. I believe that Christians who are committed to Jesus Christ have been more busier than ever. And we are full of busy activity that we cannot find time to rest quietly in the promises of God. But, you know, there's hope in Christ. He invites us to come unto me and I will give you rest, which is said in Matthew 11, verse 28. And I learned that I needed that balance in my everyday schedule because too much of a good thing can turn into a bad thing. And my schedule kept me distracted from my personal and deep need of Jesus. And I allowed the cares of this life to have too much power over me and distracting my view of heaven. And because of this, slowly but surely, I saw my grades, coming down. And I was starting not to achieve the things that I put my mind to, and my physical health was being destroyed. I was changing in ways that I thought I wasn't. I started being lazy and caring less. I hate to say that, but it happened to me. And I was daily reminded of this need throughout school, during Bible classes and worships, through my friends. And I needed him, but I kept on putting a front up. Just like Stella mentioned about putting on that mask, which is really exhausting. And then there was a point where I hit rock bottom, and that's how I felt, rock bottom. Like I just felt like I just dropped, and all the emotions just came rushing through, you know, my tears, and I could clearly see my need of needing to make that change. And I just couldn't take it any longer of surviving without having God control my life. You know, I was kept on trying to, you know, holding onto the wheel, but I just realized that I needed to let him control and to relax. And I mentioned I hit rock bottom, and that rock was Jesus, and it is Jesus. And I surrendered my life to him, and I just remember the weight being lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah, that's a great pause. That's a great revelation that you had, and that God was able to give that to you at such a young age, because a lot of people, they don't understand that until they're older, and they've carried such a heavy rock and such a heavy burden with them all along. And in this, I like your acronym BUSY, because that's one of the ways that Satan keeps us distracted, and I really like that. When we met, all of us, we talked a lot about Daniel and the comparison of his ability with his friends to be resilient in his culture. What did you see in that story?
Yeah, I think Daniel is a perfect example of staying resilient in the midst of a spiritual battlefield. King Nebuchadnezzar knew that if these men were to serve in his court, he had to completely change their lifestyle. And so the idea of brainwashing is not new to our age. And the king had an agenda to bring in that change. But at the same time, little did he know that God was going to use these young men to change his life. And Daniel purposed in his heart not to defile his body and not to allow any change to come between him and his God and his relationship with God. And I just find that so amazing. And I really want to get to that point where pause. I really want to get to that point where nothing will shake my faith, and there's no compromising between God or serving other people, or between what I want, you know, my deep selfish needs. And so I find that in Daniel's life, that faith must be built on scripture, and him and his friends were founded in the word, and they had a deep-rooted relationship.
You know, Daniel and his friends were even younger than you guys. They say they were really early teens, and the kids that you guys were going to be speaking to are probably around the age that Daniel and his friends were. And it's good to hear stories like that and remind everyone, not just your age, that we can be resilient in God, but we will be faced with challenges, and the world wants us to conform, and to remember stories like Daniel, and know that through Christ he was able to keep his faith, and that God used that faith to actually influence Babylon. And so that's awesome. And so why do you think God needs youth working as hard as you guys are now more than ever?
I think God has really put out front that he's going to use the youth in the end times, and he's going to use the young people to bring upon his missionary work. And throughout the Bible stories, we see all these young people that are being used for his work. We see David being a young shepherd boy, and we see Daniel, we see Elisha being used. And so I think that we just need to be open-minded, and we need to just really wake up and come to the point where we see our need, you know, and we need to daily surrender, because, you know, times are changing, and I believe times are changing, and he needs young people to pursue this work.
That's awesome. I like that, to pursue the work. Thank you, Bethel, for taking the time to share your story of resilience.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I like how you guys brought up that Satan mixes his information in with the truth, and how important it is for us to be able to see that. Where you guys turn to for truth is changing. you are so easy to just Google and ask Siri for information. So it's just as important to choose where you get your information in this day and age. And Harrison, that has been something that you were talking with us about, is where people are turning to find truth. So why are people who we surround ourselves with so important in this day and age?
I can tell you mainly just looking back on my earlier high school life, how much I've been changed throughout high school by the people I hang out with. I remember going into freshman year, and in 8th grade, I was very, very academically oriented. I was very focused on my grades. I had a relationship with God, had a good relationship with my family, and was just very like, when I get to high school, these are all my goals. I'm going to do this. And I just remember looking back on it, within a couple months into my freshman year, literally my first year of high school, I noticed my attitude was already changing simply because of the environment I put myself in, the people I surrounded myself with. I surrounded myself with people who were focused on the wrong things and doing the wrong things, and I just noticed that impacted me a lot. And even though I thought I could hang around these people and still be me, that's just what I felt. I felt myself changing in that way. So
why do you think that you went into your high school year with these goals on one side, but then you were drawn to those kind of people that were obviously not aligned with the previous goals that you had set?
I think the reason I was drawn to them was because they were the first people I ended up talking to. And at the time, it was harder for me to make friends. So it was like, oh, well, these are the people I've talked to and made friends, so let me just continue with them. And it led me down a wrong path. And by the end of my freshman year, I wasn't really talking with God at all, and I kind of like lost my connection with him, which was obviously my fault, but I lost that connection with him.
That's a great realization. So what changed then when you realized that you actually needed to look to God to dictate who you should be?
Well, believe it or not, it was when I first joined my swim team. I had a coach who talked to me a little bit about God. He was just saying that anytime he feels any struggle and anytime he feels like he needs somebody to lean on, God is the first person he goes to. And it took me a while to understand. I was like, well, why is he saying all this? And he was always coming up, making me feel welcome. And I just slowly, when I stopped and looked at my life, I slowly saw like all the people God was trying to put in my life to help me out and bring me back to him. So
I love that. Love the importance of the mentors that like we're talking about in this program. So you started swimming, you started being really involved with your team, but you still said that you didn't really feel a need for God. Why did you decide to make that change, and how did that happen?
pause. Yeah, you're right. So when I first started swimming, I was having fun with the team, felt like my life was like slowly getting better in terms of how I felt and my attitude, but I still didn't feel like I necessarily needed a relationship with God. And at the time I was fine with that. I was okay with not having that relationship with God. But as I started reading my Bible a little bit more, and not just for my Bible class, but actually for myself. And I noticed in Proverbs, I can't remember quite where, but in Proverbs it says, don't fool yourselves, for bad company corrupts good character. And I started reading these Bible verses, and it was just showing all these things that Jesus said, that when I looked at my life, these things were happening. Bad company was corrupting my character, and everything Jesus was saying that I could relate to was true. And so I think that's when I was like more, oh, maybe I should pursue a relationship. And a lot of people I had started hanging out with recently at the time were encouraging me to start that relationship with God. So I was like, let me try this out. And
I like that. So when if a middle school student is watching this right now and they're thinking, well, I just want to be cool and I just want to be popular and I just want to, I don't want to look like a goody goody, what advice would you give them?
I would say they pause.
I'm throwing you for a loop because you're you're doing good on impromptu. But yeah, okay, pause, everyone.
I would say don't focus on what everybody else is thinking. If we want that relationship with God, our focus should be what God thinks about what we're doing. It's not about what the people around us think we're doing. So I guess when I see kids doing that, I kind of just try to tell them, like, make sure you're focusing on the right thing and make sure you're focusing on what actually matters, because people's opinions can't dictate what you actually do. It's up to you and up to God to pursue what you want to pursue, and we shouldn't be ashamed to share God's word either. So if they're worried about how they might look if they express their feelings about God, I think they should learn to be 100% proud of it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Harrison. I see that Bethel has raised her hand. Bethel?
Okay, so going back on what Harrison, your question was on like being too good or whatever. God calls us to be a peculiar people, and he tells us that we are going to be different because Jesus was hated down here on earth. And so we are also going to be hated as well for the good things. And it goes back on, truth and error. Satan, he likes to make things he likes to make the wrong things look pretty. He likes to make sin look very beautiful, and the good things turn them to look ugly.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The Bible tells us that Satan is a very, very beautiful being, and temptation wouldn't be tempting if it wasn't attractive, right? So I love that point. Thank you so much for raising your hand on that one, Bethel. So when we do this program at the school, the teachers do divide the girls and put them in one room and the boys in another. And so Bethel and Stella would have spent 4 of the 5 days speaking with the girls, and Ezekiel and Harrison would have spent 4 of the 5 days speaking to the boys. But we do what we call a swap day. And that is where the girls, Stella and Bethel, have prepared a special message that they wanted to share with the boys. And Ezekiel and Harrison, they have prepared a special message that they wanted to speak to the middle school girls on. So we're going to be starting with Harrison and Ezekiel. And we were talking about the importance of a great character and why character building is so important. So I'm going to let you guys share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it is really important to have a great character and to not make sure that the society in the world doesn't influence you to what you want to act like. So one thing I'm going to talk about is like, what image do you want to portray? As we know, like today's society portrays a wrong idea about how we should act, because there's like many pressures from social media and like how we should act and how we should pause. Okay. Today's society portrays a wrong idea about how we should act. Many are pressured by society to act and be a certain way. In this day of age, people judge each other based on how good they look on a post or how many likes they get on it, and also how many followers they get as well. Self-image in this day is competitive, like who's the best at looking good or who has the more followers or something like that. I mean, you can get lots of clout with it, and you can get a lot of people to know you, But the thing is, I mean, those people really don't know you because they're just looking at you based on like a picture they saw. They don't really know you from the heart. And that's one of the main problems, because you can't let somebody from the outside dictate you, even if they don't know you at all. So the problem is, can a person judge you based on what you said online or image that you displayed? In addition to like people pressuring you and also telling you what you should do and be acting like, you can also, through social media in this day and age, can hide your true self. You can like through like an image or something, you don't have to show your true self. You can like act a certain way and people won't know, so you like impress people. So that's like one main thing that's problem in today's society.
Awesome. That's so true. Harrison.
I wanted to talk a little bit about peer pressure, and I think peer pressure is rooted in when we fall for peer pressure. I think it's rooted in us not being confident enough in our own standards and boundaries, because then we're compromising our standards and boundaries to do what somebody else wants us to do. And really what we should focus on is, what does God want us to do? What is God's plan for our life? And what mission has God set out for us? And that God isn't asking us to listen. I mean, he is asking us to listen to each other, but at the same time, he's not telling us to follow what everybody else is doing, but instead he's asking us to follow what he is doing. And a person is much more respectable when they set their boundaries and they don't go back on them based on what another person says.
What are you seeing on social media as the focus? What are a lot of people focusing on?
I pause.
So you said, mentioned on your statement here that we're focusing a lot on ourselves.
I believe a lot of us are focused on ourselves. If we look at social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and whatever other media setups there are, a lot of it is we simply post and talk about ourselves. And I think it's a lot of people looking for that acceptance. And we always ask, what do you think of me? How do I look here? And we're always so worried about, what does this person think? And then if we notice we're not getting enough of the attention that we want, people will do about anything, post about anything just to get the attention for it. And really, that's not something we need to do at all.
Yeah, thank you. That's very true. So Ezekiel, you were going to share a little bit about where you find your identity.
Yeah, so in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 4, it says that you should clothe yourselves instead with the beauty that comes within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. This is so precious to God. So what we must find our identity with is with God. He's the one who created us. He's the one who knows us from the inside out. And most importantly, in 1 Samuel 16:7, it says that God looks not in the outward appearance, but in the heart. So we must look to God to how we should act. And like when Jesus came down to earth and how he acted towards others and how he treated everybody, he wasn't like really famous around the area. He wasn't like showing himself like, hey, here, I'm the Messiah and you must all bow down or something like that. But he was very humble, and he just helped with a kind and caring spirit. He helped other people. So in the same way, that's how we should act. And like Bethel said earlier, us as remnant people, we're not going to be like, we're going to be different from the world. We're not going to be liked from the world. And we know that the world and like God's character can't mix together. So we must be like a peculiar people and act with kindness towards others. So a true noble character is what God wants from each and every one of us. And what really brings true happiness and love in relationships is a person loving each other for who they really are in the inside. So it's not like physical appearance or whatever other things you look at, but what really with relationships and friendships and everything, what really matters is the connection and love you have with each other and how you treat each other based on your character. So
Yeah.
that's really important to have in this day and age.
That's such a good reminder, because we get so caught up on what we think we need to look like that we don't really pay attention to what we need to act like. So thank you for that, Ezekiel. So Harrison, you were going to share a little bit on what God says is valuable in you.
Yeah, I believe what God says is valuable in us and what society says is valuable in us are two extremely different things, and the devil will try to blend them and try to tell us, oh, but you can just do this a little better, you can, and then we end up in this big loop of just trying to be good enough, trying to be valued in society. We want people to look at us and say, I want them, I like them, I appreciate them, I value them, and we're looking for it in all the wrong places. And what God says is valuable in us is our hearts, our character. Because when we go to heaven, we're going to be given new bodies. And so the way I think of it is, does it really matter what I look like right now, when in the end I'm going to get something much better? And it's our true personality and our characteristics that make a difference. As you can have a good personality and a kind heart your whole life, but you're not always going to look the same your whole life.
That is awesome. Thank you. That is some good insight, you guys. I appreciate you taking the time. So we're going to look now with Bethel and Stella, and you guys are going to talk a little bit about what defines you. You would be speaking to the middle school boys about respect and the value that God lays on you. So I'm going to let you girls share what you've worked on.
Yeah, so the first one that we really wanted to point out was respect. Especially in high school and over the years, respect is something that we definitely see some guys struggle with, and it's not just respect towards others, it's respect towards themselves. A lot of the time when they don't respect themselves, it's harder for them to respect others. And what falls under disrespecting is joking at a time when it's not permittable, or just pause. Just not taking other people's feelings into account. And so from what I see is that they're disrespecting other people, but then they don't understand why those people don't want to talk to them, or why they're getting in trouble for things that they've done or said, because it's just they become so used to saying things like that. They don't even know that they're disrespecting people, if that makes sense. One thing that Bethel said that really stuck out to me was that the phrase she said was, Jesus was a gentleman. And so we can take Jesus as a good example of respect, because he respected his mom, he respected all the people, and he still respected those who did harm against him. He was still respectful to the people putting him down, and he was still respectful towards himself. He was a confident young man. And so something that's really important with respect and maturity is just having respect for yourself. Don't put yourself down. If you can't make that layup, don't beat yourself up. Spiritual grit, push through it. If you miss a goal, try again. If you lose a game, it's okay. It's one game. You haven't lost the entire battle. It's just you have to respect yourself just as equally as you have to respect other people.
Yes, and that has respect goes along with maturity. And going back on, Jesus was a gentleman. Everything that Christ did should be the definition of a gentleman, because just a picture his love for us, his love for the church, treating us with respect. And even though we slam the door at his face, we don't want, he still comes back knocking at that door of our hearts. And so maturity is associated with faithfulness. And in the Bible, there's a story, Elisha, he was found faithful in the littlest of things. And when you're found faithful in the littlest of things, God will give you bigger tasks. And this reminds me of growing up, my mom loves to cook, and it's her passion. And I didn't just, start, cooking up everything. I started, cleaning the kitchen, washing the dishes. And then from there, I went to cutting vegetables. And so when she found me faithful in the smallest of things, she gave me bigger tasks. And that goes along with being in high school. If you're faithful doing your homework and doing chores at home, there are bigger things that you can accomplish, like being a leader and watching out for other people. And so going back on what Stella was saying about joking, there's a time for everything. There's a time to laugh, there's a time to play, and there's a time to be serious.
That's really good. I like that. So you guys are going to be talking a little bit about some standards and some how expressing our emotions, and then also defining yourselves with your surroundings.
Yeah. So one thing that like I've always told myself with standards is to like set them at a good place, like not something that's like unachievable, because if you're trying to measure yourself up to those standards or measure someone else that you're potentially interested in up to those standards, you're not going to reach it if the bar is up here. But at the same time, you can't lower your standards so low that you're going to trip and fall over them. You have to have them at like a decent level. And with standards, that goes along with maturity and respect of respecting yourself enough to set goals and like allowing yourself to overcome and push beyond what you thought your limits were before. Because if let's say you put the bar here, that's a decent level, but that's really not challenging yourself. That's not challenging anyone else. If you put the bar up here, that's a bit more of a challenge, but it's not over your head that you can't comprehend it. Another point that we wanted to address was expressing emotions. And I know that women typically tend to be better at expressing our emotions because we're more emotionally inclined. We're that spaghetti, whereas guys are like boxes. They can't talk about this thing and then suddenly just like segue and connect it to this thing. You have to pull out the different boxes. They don't touch. And so a Bible character that I thought expressed emotions really well was Job. If you think about it, he had everything taken away from him. Like he was really happy with his life. He had a beautiful wife and many kids and land and animals and a nice house, and like he had money and he had friends. But then everything was taken away from him and he was stripped, and what was left was a good, strong man who loved God and still had his faith and belief and still had his standards. When his friends told him to scorn God, or his wife told him to scorn God, he still had that standard and that faith and the belief, and he was like, no, I'm not going to scorn God. No, I'm not gonna fall and submit to the devil. And people often think that expressing emotions means that like you kind of have to have things figured out when you're talking about it. But no, when Job was on his knees praying, he was like, God, like he was questioning God, like, God, why have you allowed this to happen to me? Why is this happening to me? What have I done? Why am I feeling this pain? What do I need to do to like continue to serve you? And he was being tested. And so I think that's something that a lot of young men have to realize, that like there's no weakness in expressing emotions. Like for me, when I read the story of Job, I think he's like one of the strongest people ever to like undergo all that and to overcome. Like there's nothing wrong with crying over something, or feeling pain, or just saying that like you're sad. You don't have to like be okay 100% of the time. It's okay not to be okay. And I think that's definitely healthy, because then you're not bottling it up. You're letting it out, and you're not going to explode. And so it's perfectly fine to express your emotions.
That's such a good concept, and especially if young men can grasp that at the age that the young men that watch this will be. Thank you for sharing that. Bethel?
Yes, so we also pointed out defining yourself or ourselves with the things around us, like clothes or sports or shoes or just the materialistic things that have all of a sudden come to matter, just like Ezekiel was saying, it's the character that matters and not the things around you. And the story that comes to mind is Joseph from the Old Testament. He was taken into Egypt as a slave and he was entering a different world, most likely. And he didn't allow the slave title to change his standards, to change who he was, to change all that he was taught from his upbringing. And just like entering high school, there are different opportunities, there are different, way roads and different obstacles that Satan will put in our way, and it's up to us to choose how we are going to accomplish or overcome these obstacles. And so also in the story, Potiphar's wife, Joseph's boss, his wife tried to pursue him, but he knew his boundaries and he knew his limits. And so at the end of this all, it's just like saying, don't let basketball define who you are, but allow God to really choose for you and allow him to pursue and to show you the way that he wants you to go. And
yeah, that is so good. And that's what we're doing. Like you mentioned, Joseph, before he got into Potiphar's palace, before he got tempted with many things, including Potiphar's wife, he had set a plan. And that's what we're doing right now. You guys are helping younger kids before they get to high school decide what they are going to do and what they're not going to do. And I like that you brought that out, because Joseph knew before he got there where his line was. And because he knew that before he got there, he was able to make a clear choice relatively quickly. And you guys going into college and into the real world are going to be facing the same thing too. You're going into a new land that you haven't, and the skills that you're learning here and the acknowledgement in what you guys are talking about, you're way ahead of the game. You guys are got your plans in place, and it's been exciting to watch. Yes, Bethel?
So going back on Joseph's story real quick, we see that he entered Egypt as the lowest of the low. And from there, we see the steps that he took, but it was only because God was with him. And at the end of his story, he was put second place after Pharaoh. And so we see from his story that God can take us to higher places as long as we put him first in our lives.
That is awesome. Both you and Stella had some examples as far as growth and relationships that I thought were great. And I'll have Stella share her analogy.
Yeah, so I personally, I'm a very visual person. And so I when I talk about things, I always like to have some type of visual or comparison. And so I was, when Bethel and I were preparing this, we were looking at different things, and then I just saw my plant sitting there. And so I have my bonsai tree, and I love plants, but what we were talking about is that there are so many different aspects to a tree or just a little plant. And so you have your roots, which are the foundation. They're firm in the ground. They help supply the water to the plants. And then you have the main trunk, which is the support system. This is where things are going to branch off from. And then you have those strong different branches. And then you finally have your twigs. And then when this is in season and it's green, then you have your little leaves. And what we took from that is when you have a firm foundation like God, there's no need to fear the wind at all, because those roots are seeking out the water, and God's like the water of life, And so then you have your trunk, which could be your family, the people you trust most, your mentors, those people that not only take from that firm foundation that you want to have, but also like they supply more support. And then you have like your friends, which are the branches, you know, your friends that are there, you know, to hold you up and branch out and reach out. And then you have the twigs and the leaves. And one thing that we said is some people, while they might be there for like 2 years, they might just be a twig, you know? Like you have branches, might be lifelong friends, but then you have like the twigs that might only be there for 2 to 3 years of your life. And you have your leaves, which are seasonal friends and seasonal people. And it's okay to understand that some people aren't going to be in your life for the entire time that you live. There's going to be change, there's going to be growth. This tree that I have right here isn't going to look the same in like 2 years, in 3 months. It's going to be different. And it's okay to understand that you can be the same person that you are and still have the same firm foundations. Because while the outside appearance is going to change, the roots are only going to grow deeper if you keep watering your plant and let them. A lot of the time with cultivation especially, people want to plant that gospel seed, you know, and they're like, it's okay, I planted my seed, you know, like I know about it, it's whatever, it's fine. And I'm just going to plant the seed and then I'm just going to go watch Netflix, it should be fine, you know. But the thing is, when you plant something, you can't just plant it and expect it to grow without putting work into it. You have to water your plant, you have to give it good soil, you have to fertilize, you have to give it sunlight, you have to take time out of your day to care for that plant. And so it's like that with a relationship with God. Like, yes, you can have that seed, but it's not going to grow unless you put time into it, unless you water it, and unless over time you allow those roots to grow deeper.
Yeah, that's a great analogy on that one. Thank you very much. And Bethel, so you had 150 kids.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little about my experience at school. So like there's about 150 kids at school. And so you're bound to know almost everyone. And therefore there's more acquaintances, but not each and every one of them is your friend. And my mom always reminds me of the scripture in let me find out, Matthew 10 verse 16. It says, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And so from this I've learned that not to be so gullible and quick to open, because words can be deceiving. And that tree analogy really helped Stella. And so I've learned from a young age, I've always learned to be a blessing and not a curse, and to realize that Jesus came down here to live for others, and he wants us to do the same. So as entering high school, you might have friends, you might not have friends, and you might need someone, but just have a thought in your mind, someone might need you in their lives, and you might just be that light that God is going to use.
Yeah. That is good, you guys. Thank you so much for working on that. We're going to be wrapping this up here. And this is a reminder, society is going to always tell us what standards it wants us to meet. And it's hard to know what the Bible tells us and what our peers tell us if we aren't, like Stella said, rooted and have deep roots and have good mentors. And we see in Romans 12:2, it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. And it's a renewing of your mind every day. Every day you guys are going to have to make a decision and a choice. And as we close up, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. And one is for each of you, where have you battled with the distinction of knowing what God's will is and the gray area of what your friends say it's okay? I'll start with Stella.
So definitely for me, just like would be in a lot of leadership roles and stuff, it's been, hold on, pause. Mom, I was recording. Yeah, okay. All right, I'm gonna restart again. Okay. For me, one of the things that has really affected how I define myself is like definitely my leadership roles, because like for the longest time I've thought that like I have to be strong for everyone else, so like I don't have like time to like break down myself, you know, and just to like kind of be vulnerable. Like I have to like be this firm rock for everyone else all the time, even though like deep down like I have nothing else to give. It's kind of like, you know, a water bottle, like it's empty and it's trying to give other people water, but it's not even full itself. And so I like this year especially, I really like assessed that and realized that like I have to take care of myself before I can take care of others to the best of the ability. And it like goes back to the tree thing, where then I'd see all these other great leaders and stuff, and I'd be like, well, why can't I be like that? And so like I compare my tree to their tree, and their tree has had longer to develop and form, and then I'm comparing myself to them. And it's kind of also like that one analogy, like why is the grass greener on the other side? But then people don't take the time to realize that like they're too busy looking at other people's grass and other people's side that they're not even taking care of their own. And so that's definitely something that like I've battled with and had to like realize that like I am not alone with this, and I'm sure a whole bunch of people struggle with the same thing too. And so before you take care of others, you have to take care of yourself.
It's really good. Harrison.
Could you remind me of the question?
Mm-hmm. So earlier, this is all paused, so we'll cut right into you. But earlier we talked about you having to transform your mind every day, kind of change your perspective, be aware of what's going on. Otherwise, you could mix, kind of gray the area between what friends are saying, oh, it's okay if we just do this, and the clear distinction of God's voice.
Okay. I would say in my past, I've kind of just looked at the result, because most simple things you were doing, you can kind of see at least some of the result. So if you're like, oh, if I decide to work hard for something, you might not know exactly where it's going to take you, but you know that hard work can get you places, so you can know that there's always that possibility. But yeah, I would say just looking at the result and how does it impact me when I talk to God? Do I feel myself being pulled away from God when I do it? And a lot of it comes with being really honest with yourself, not trying to push it off and be like, oh, I feel fine, it's okay, when it's really not. And so I would say just being honest with yourself, honest with your standards, and if anything looks like a gray area, like, oh, it might not be what my standards hold. It might not, because the devil always distracts us with the might not. It might not be this. It might be okay. But unless I know it's 100% okay by God and approved by him, and not mostly, as Satan would say, I would say just being super honest with myself and not letting up on my standards at all.
That's awesome. Thank you. Bethel.
Pause. Can I ask a quick? Okay. I don't know.
The question?
No,
Oh.
you said this has to do with what society is telling you, and
So, like every day when Bible tells us to renew our mind, a lot of times we always think it's a one time, like, okay, I'm baptized, I've done this, but it's actually, it's a daily thing. It's even a minute by minute thing. Every time you're faced with a question, you're having to renew your mind and change and look at it from a different perspective. And so like Harrison was saying, sometimes Satan can just kind of get into well, it might not be that bad. It, a little bit of gray. So in high school and where you're at now, how have you battled with the clear distinction? Like, oh, this might not be bad, or no, I'm going to stick with God. Does that make sense?
okay. Oh, excuse me.
Whenever you're ready, hold it.
Okay. So for me, it would be spending that time with Jesus, just as like what Harrison was saying, because we can be in a Christian school and we can do all these Christian stuff, but what matters, what comes to the end of it at the end of the day, is your relationship with Jesus. It's not your parents' relationship, it's not your friends, it's not your pastors, it's you and God. And so I think sometimes I would find myself in the middle of doing mission work at school, you know, for like campus ministries, and saying, oh, this is a good deed, like basically going off on your works, when it shouldn't be by going off by your works. It should be something that's personal and just really developing that relationship. And I know that we talk a lot about having that relationship with Jesus all the time at school, but it's really important to understand what that means, to really grasp and understand that we need to put this relationship first above everything else, because if we don't have it, then we'll be like the man who built his house upon the sand. And when that storm comes, there's no foundation and we'll just crumble.
Yeah, that's awesome. Ezekiel.
Yeah, I've struggled with this a lot in the past, and I've had friends who have pressured me to do stuff like this. And sometimes I would follow them, and unfortunately, it would lead down to a bad road that I would go through. But what it really is, how to battle this distinction, is, again, like all of you guys mentioned, having a deep-rooted relationship with God. And like even with a little temptation that Satan brings towards you, that can build up to something bigger and bigger, and then that can just, again, lead you down to a bad road. So again, having a deep rooted relationship with God is really important, and even if it costs your friends too, because I mean, in the end, all matters is what God thinks in the heart. And you'll lose some people, and people won't like you at all. I mean, being a Christian is tough, really. I mean, because a lot of people won't like you because of what you say or do or how you act. So you have to be determined, knowing that God loves you in the end, and that what you're doing is right, and that you try to help your friends too. But if they're just not going that way, you just end it. So again, having deep-rooted relationship with God is really important.
Thank you. You guys have been so awesome. You have taken time out of your schedule to do this virtually with us, and being able to put this out so that the kids who are not able to go to school will at least be able to hear the message, and anyone else listening will be able to hear the message. And I hope that anyone else watching this is inspired by your integrity, your grit, and your resilience. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate you coming.